All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Transformed and Free. I am your host, Shelley Brown, and today I have the honor of sharing Linda Hoenigsberg with you. And in addition to having a really powerful story, Linda's writings have been featured in Chicken Soup for the Soul. She is also a professional counselor and a marriage and family therapist. Linda, in the Gospel of John, in chapter 16, verse 33, Jesus said, in this world, you will have trouble, or you will have tribulation. And Linda, as I read through your story, you certainly have had your fair share of tribulations. As I read, there were several jaw-dropping moments of trauma, and probably more than several, of trauma and unthinkable loss. So would you just take a few minutes and give us a glimpse into your story?
You know, it's a long story and I'm going to try to shorten it as much as possible. So I'm sure I'm going to leave some things out, but I'll hit the highlights. I was raised by two parents who had a lot of trauma in their own life, although as a child, I did not know that. I was raised in a family where you just didn't talk about anything. And as I became closer to becoming a teenager, they both became alcoholics. And so my dad would stop at the bar on the way home. My mom would be passed out in the chair by 10 o'clock in the morning many days. And my sister, brother, and I were neglected and left to finish raising ourselves. All of us, all three of us, my brother, sister, and I, rebelled. I ended up in juvenile hall at 14. My sister also spent time in juvenile hall. And I was kicked out of school, high school, at 15 for just a lot of different things, mainly truancy. And I met my first husband at 15 years old. He was 5 years older than I was, and he was a felon. And his friendships included gang members from East Los Angeles and pimps from Los Angeles, around the Watts area. And so I was introduced to this seedy part of life at 15. And I still have memories of moments of shock where I would be in a situation that I had never been in before, and I was very fearful. But my first husband, I ended up marrying him at 16. I got pregnant about 6 months after I married him, and then he abandoned me and us after our son was born. And I kind of rebelled even more. By 17, I had my own apartment. I was a secretary for a termite control company, and I was raising my son on my own. And I started becoming emotionally ill at that point with a lot of anxiety and a lot of depression. And I made a couple of suicide attempts and was placed in the state mental hospital. When I got out, after signing myself out, I went on a date and ended up being gang raped by that guy and 5 of his friends. And I felt like it was probably my fault because I accepted a date with somebody I didn't really know, these types of things. And so I carried this shame and guilt and didn't tell anyone. I thought about calling the police, and I just pictured them questioning me about why it was my fault. So I didn't say anything to anyone. And I didn't realize it at the time, but my next steps in life were a response to that. And I became very self-destructive, lived on the streets, began taking drugs. And I spent about 10 years with drug abuse, life on the streets for maybe a year of that, but ended up in quite a few abusive relationships during this period of time. Like I said, I had a sister and a brother, and I was extremely close to my brother. He was a year older than I was, and we were best friends. And he had been to Vietnam and back very early on, and he ended up committing suicide at 25. I was 24 at the time. My response to that was to want to find out if God was real. And I was pointed in that direction by a youth pastor of a Baptist church in town. But he wanted me to go to a different church than his, which that was really the hand of God, because the type of church he was going to, here I was, this drug addicted, hippie type young woman. I weighed about 82 pounds at this point, long, stringy hair, kind of wild look in my eyes. And the culture of his church was more the ladies getting together for tea parties and things like that. And he knew that would have not been good for me. So he led me to this other church and introduced me to this pastor, and it was like an incubator there. I was living with my boyfriend at the time. I had 2 kids by then. They didn't ever say a word to me about my life. They just loved me. And God started speaking to me about my life. Let me backtrack a little bit. By this time, I was seriously mentally ill. I was suffering from panic disorder and agoraphobia, where I didn't feel like I could leave my house, and major depression with suicidal thoughts constantly. So this pastor literally asked his congregation to fast and pray for me. And they spent an entire day and night fasting and praying for me.
What love.
There were times when I couldn't come to church because I was having a panic attack, and the pastor's wife would leave her church service and knock on my apartment door and tell me, "I'll wait for you while you get ready, and I will sit with you in the service." And she did that about 3 times. And I really don't think I would be here. She missed like half of her church service just for me. So that was an amazing thing. But at that time in church history, that was in the mid 70s, I guess I would say Christianity as a whole did not understand mental illness. And it was couched in terms like the devil's making you do it. If you just stand against the enemy, all these problems will go away. And you shouldn't go to counseling, and you shouldn't take any medication. And it was like a kind of a formulaic way of looking at how God would work in a life. And there were several times when I still wanted to end my life because I was suffering so terribly, and it didn't seem like anything was changing. And each time I came very close to that, God stepped in and just did something amazing. Like somebody would suddenly appear on my doorstep, or my phone would ring, or something else would happen and stopped me, gave me a little bit more hope to continue going on. Well, 3 years into this, when I loved Jesus Christ with all my heart, I began to think that it was possible that my father wanted to kill himself as well. And I began to pray. Every day I would pray that this wouldn't happen. And in my mind, if you asked for something and you claimed that it would be so, it would be so. I really believed that at the time. And that was the teaching, really. And one day I got a call asking me to come over to my mother's apartment, and my father had shot himself in the head, and he was in the garage. And at that moment, I mean, I can still remember the whole thing. And at that moment, I felt like God had just broken my heart and didn't care about my life at all. I didn't tell anyone that because that would have been unacceptable. So I held this secret that God had broken my heart for a long time. And Shelley, I can't tell you how close Jesus Christ was to me during those months. One day, this lady came to me and told me that she had woken up in the middle of the night with that verse, the days of your mourning are over. And I got so excited. And I thought, okay, because I still had this heavy, heavy burden of grief from my brother's death and my father's death. And I woke up the next morning and it was still there.
Mm.
And so again, I was disappointed with God and I didn't understand why the formula wasn't working for me. And within about 3 months, it was like when you have the hiccups and suddenly you realize that they're gone, but you don't remember the last hiccup.
Mm.
Suddenly I realized all that grief is gone. But when did it end? I don't know. And it was a complete healing that has never returned. I have never had that burden of grief. And I believed that I was helpless against this overwhelming grief. And that was something that the Lord had to do supernaturally for me. I couldn't, He didn't want me to suffer with that any longer.
Right.
So that was huge in my life for
Is that,
how I
is,
felt.
is that what kind of with the shift that took place in your life to restore your faith in him,
Yes.
turn you back
Yes.
to his
It
heart?
restored I already knew because of this feeling of his presence that was so strong, even though I was so heartbroken. I can't even explain that feeling. I just knew he was on me like a cloak, like a mantle of um, blessing.
Mm.
But when that happened, I really knew nothing could ever tell me again that he didn't love me.
Yeah.
And that was probably 1979, So then that began the healing of me emotionally.
Right.
And I tell people that I feel like how I became healed of mental illness was a combination of first getting to know Jesus Christ and receiving him into my life. That was the beginning. Then learning the word, because I began to learn scriptures like Philippians, where Paul talks about how to think about things. I started doing that. I went to counseling, and some things were supernaturally healed. So it's like this combination of things happened. So at that point, I figured I needed to marry my boyfriend because I realized that that was not what God wanted for me. And at first, it was wonderful. We had a son of our own. He legally adopted my other two children, and he became a Christian, sang in the church. We ministered to youth. We were together in this. And then he fell away from the Lord and began having affairs and got into drugs and alcohol. And this went on for about 6 years. And then we divorced. And unfortunately, I want to talk about this later when I talk about the takeaways from all this happening. But I think what I have noticed about, since I'm a psychotherapist too, and I've talked to other people and read different things, a lot of times when someone becomes a Christian and they begin to get healing in their life and symptoms go away, like anxiety, panic attacks, depression, they confuse that with I'm healed. And they will even proclaim it. I used to proclaim it and give my testimony. I'm healed because I no longer have anxiety in my life. I no longer have depression or grief. And in reality, I had a lot of healing to do. And in one of those ways I didn't understand was relationships and boundaries and how I viewed romance and what I was drawn to as far as marriage partners. By this time, just 40 years old, by this time, getting some insight into that not all men were jerks. I was drawn to a type. I didn't understand that. I thought, like, this is just the reality of relationships. And I met my husband, who was probably the nicest guy I've ever known, and very like centered and healthy and had a depth of character. And of course, I wasn't drawn to him. And he pursued me relentlessly. And to make a long story short, there, we ended up getting married. We just celebrated our 25th wedding anniversary.
Congratulations. He's your Boaz.
Yes, he's my Boaz. And his love taught me about God's agape love. He has that unconditional love and caring for me that I had never known in my life. And it has brought so much healing about that part that I had never been healed from before. I don't want to take too long, but 6 years after we got married, I fell down the stairs in my home that you're looking at and broke my neck. And I was home alone and stood up as fast as I could and felt like maybe I had broken my arm, and got a neighbor to take me to the hospital, and I had broken my neck. So, and I started this journey of chronic pain, and there was several miracles that happened that brought me out of a lot of that pain, and it was a journey. I ended up addicted to pain pills early on. This was in the year 2000, and had to go through withdrawal. And all I thought was, well, now I want to become a therapist one day. Now here's another experience that I can relate to with people. Yeah. So that's kind of how I looked at everything that happened to me. Now here's another experience that I can relate to wounded people.
Did you ever just at some point say, okay, I don't need any more experiences to relate?
I really at every point thought, okay, probably nothing else is going to happen to me because I've had enough.
Yeah.
I after I broke my neck, I really felt like, after I recovered a little bit, I felt like God was telling me that now's the time I could actually go back to school and get a degree and become a therapist. And I knew it would take a very long time. So I went back to school.
And you went back to school at what age?
51, I believe, is when I started. And, after getting kicked out of high school and having a record of F's, it was an amazing experience. It was like a do-over. And I went to a brick and mortar college for my undergrad with students who were 18 to 22 years old, and graduated summa cum laude, and had my acceptance letter to get my master's degree at the university. And during that summer, I picked up my grandson and tore my rotator cuff. And during the surgery, I had surgery, and the anesthesiologist at the end woke me up and told me that he had seen this huge mass in my throat, and he wanted to have me get a CT scan immediately. I'd never seen anything like that in 25 years of doing that. Goodness. And I immediately got the CT scan, and there wasn't anything in my throat. Nothing that, like, I even had a camera. There was nothing in my throat. But on the CT scan, at the very top of it, where they accidentally caught the underside of my brain, they saw I had a brain tumor right next to my brainstem, and I had not had any symptoms at that point. So they sent me to neurosurgeons who both said, this is inoperable. You have about a year to live. And this was in 2006. And I mean, it was traumatic, and I was frightened, but there was something inside of me that knew God was up to something. And I started researching this type of tumor online and found a neurosurgeon in Los Angeles who specialized in this area of the brain. And I sent him my MRI, and he called me and he said, I can help you. So I scheduled this brain surgery, and I can still remember the peace I felt during the whole process of that. I flew to LA, had a 7-hour brain surgery, and halfway through, the neurosurgeon came out and had a meeting with my daughter and my husband because he was very worried about continuing it. And they both felt like God told them, go ahead and do what you can.
Mm.
And I woke up from that brain surgery, and uh, I can't tell you the shape I was in. I couldn't walk. My eyeball was clear over to here. I lost the hearing in my ear. And for 3 years, I couldn't walk without Tom holding me up. Um, Over a period of 3 years, slowly but surely, I healed from that. But in the meantime, I still wanted my master's degree. So I applied for an online, fully accredited university for my master's degree in mental health, and laid in bed with a textbook right up to my eyeball, and ended up 3 years later with a 4.0 in a master's in mental health. Which, I'm not bragging about that. It's just
No, that,
there was this drive
yeah.
that I felt like was a gift of perseverance
Mhm.
in me that had nothing to do with me. And then a couple, 3 years went by, and suddenly I felt like God was speaking to me again. Even though I had had MRIs every year and was told that everything was okay, something inside of me told me, get back to the doctor because something's going on. And I did. And the brain tumor had been growing back for 3 years. And I had to have this whole surgery all over again.
Mm.
And I went to the same neurosurgeon in Los Angeles, had another 7-hour surgery. And that time I did a lot better, but I did have some deficits that I still live with. And I couldn't just go rent an office and build this private practice again. But the Lord has opened doors for me, and I see clients, not as many, but I do still work in that. I lead groups at church, which I didn't have the opportunity or the time to do before. And I supervise a therapist that's in training, and I'm totally content with where the Lord has me in my life right now. So it's been a journey, and I feel like I'm not done. I feel like that every maybe decade of my walk with the Lord, I've learned something different about how He can work in a life, and that there is no formula.
Mm.
And like you said at the beginning, which when you quoted that verse about in this world we will have tribulation, I thought, oh my gosh, that's like exactly in my early walk with the Lord, those types of scriptures weren't really taught. And we kind of ignored the fact that Paul went through terrible tribulations, even when he was right smack in the middle of what the Lord was doing in his life. And that the Lord promised us that we would suffer, and that we shouldn't be surprised. And that he just uses all this. And that I think one of the takeaways that I have learned through this last trial was we aren't going to, he's going to do something, but it maybe isn't going to relate to what we think it should. What I've learned is that we can trust him, that he is a good God in all the circumstances that we face, and that he walks with us, he weeps with us, and that he will never leave us or forsake us, no matter what. So I have learned a lot of lessons in the last couple of years, and one of the biggest ones was real agape love and a forgiveness for my parents that I never expected and astounds me. Real healing to where I can't wait till I see them again. And I was able to lead my mom to the Lord when she was dying of cancer. It's just been amazing. No matter what comes next,
Yeah.
it's going to be okay.
Yeah. And there's a verse in, I always forget if it's First or Second Corinthians, but it's where it says that, and it's very misinterpreted. that God will not give you more than you can bear. And
Exactly. Yes.
contrast to that verse is that you will not be tempted to
Yes.
sin where he will not make a way out, you know. So but we use that, and Christians and non-believers just throw that out. Oh, well, no matter what you're going through, oh, you'll get through it, because God will never give you more than you can bear. And he does give us more than we can bear, but
Yeah.
he's with us in that process, because there is no way that anyone can tell me that walking in and finding your dad having just shot himself is not too much to bear. That is
It was
under.
too much to bear. It cracked my mind,
Absolutely.
it broke me.
Yeah.
But I've never felt his presence so strong in my life before or since.
Yeah.
And that's something I can hang on to. And I was mad. I was angry at God, but he relentlessly pursued me.
That you are living a testament to someone who has chosen, when you could have raised your fist in anger and bitterness to the Lord. And not that you didn't get angry, because I know you did. We all
Uh-huh.
have those times where we don't understand, and the ache is so deep and inconsolable that yes, we're going to have those moments, but ultimate, you can either raise your fist in anger to him, or we can raise our hands and surrender to him. And you have surrendered to him. And I also, you know, and I can just see this, I know for my own life, and I can see it in your life, where you have these moments of surrender, and we all have to get to that point of surrender. But there's a point in our journeys and our intimacy with the Lord, and the more we know him, the more we love him, the more we can trust him, and we get to this place of intimacy where it's a shifting from a surrender to a yielding. And the yielding comes with a completely different motive. You know, I think of surrender as, okay, I give, uncle, you know, I give,
Right.
you know. But and you are, and you have to get to that point in your walk or in a certain journey of surrender. Because I'm not saying tomorrow I won't be, okay, uncle, uncle, I give, Lord. But at some point in our walk, those surrender moments, I think, are fewer and far between. And it's more of that yielding, and it's motivated by out of a love and a trust, because now we really know him. And we know that no matter how painful the circumstance is, that I don't believe he caused it, but that he would allow to come in our life, because I believe that he would never allow it unless there's purpose. And so if it has purpose, then we can trust him with the process and know that he will, as he said, and it's not a cliche, he will work all things together for our good.
Yes.
Promise to us, to those who love the Lord. That's a promise to us as believers.
I
And
think
you've
too
chosen
about,
to yield to him.
yeah. When even at the time of my father's death, I thought of that scripture in Job where Job said, "Though he slay me, yet will I trust him." And that's how I felt, that God had just slayed me.
Yeah.
And then it was my choice eventually that I would trust him no matter what. And I also realized that when we're praying for something that involves other people, it's not that God has turned a deaf ear on our prayers, but there is that aspect of he gave everyone a free will, and he can influence people, but it doesn't mean that they're going to listen or yield to his voice. And I think that was something that I really misunderstood until that happened. And so I saw it as God didn't care about me or what I was praying about. And it didn't matter how long I was on my knees. He didn't care. And now I realize that wasn't the case at all. Just like he wept when Lazarus was laying dead, and he knew he was going to raise him from the dead, but his heart was broken for the pain that death was causing in this world, and that he weeps with us. Like he is heartbroken over what sin has done in this world and the pain that we have to go through. But he also knows what he's going to do in it. It doesn't mean that he doesn't hurt with us or that he's not with us when we're in pain. I realize how much he loves me and how much it hurts him, uh, for the painful world that we are walking through. But he also knows the end and what he's going to do.
Yes.
So that's what we can hang on to.
Yeah. which brings me to, that's a great segue into this. At the beginning when I shared that in this world you will have trouble or tribulation, the last part of that verse is, but be of good cheer because I have overcome the world.
Yes.
And so he does know. He knows what we do not know. His ways are not our ways, and he knows what we don't know.
Yeah.
But we can rest assured that it does turn out well for
Yeah.
us, for those who know the Lord, and make him Lord of their life. It does turn out well for us.
Yes.
So I just want to ask you, if in these final moments, uh, if I were to guess, I would say that there's two different types of people that are listening to this. They fall in two different categories. One, they're either at the end of their rope and they're holding on by a thread, or two, someone close to them is at the end of their rope and they're holding on by a thread. So as we close out our time, do you think you can just kind of put that counselor, that Christian anointed woman of God counselor hat on, and just take a moment and offer some hope and encouragement to whoever falls into that category, whether it's for their own heart or if it's for them to be able to take that mantle and share it with somebody that's close to them. Just speak the heart of Jesus to them.
Well, when I was going through serious mental illness myself in my 20s, I really felt like this would be how I felt for the rest of my life. I had no hope. I didn't want to live anymore. Suicidal thoughts plagued me 24 hours a day for several years, and I was helpless against it. And I received a lot of platitudes from a lot of Christians, like, you just need to get over it. You just need to move on. Like, you just need to stand against the enemy. All those things that you hear, which really like exacerbated the problem. When I got well, I realized no matter how deep the pit, Jesus reaches a hand down and helps lift us out of that when we can't climb out of it on our own. And I just want to encourage anyone to never think there's no hope, especially if they're feeling suicidal and that they don't want to live anymore. I am so thankful I didn't follow through with that. I guess I would just encourage people to hold on to the hem of his garment and ask him, please tell me what I can do. Give me that hope. Fill my heart when I can't fill my own. And he will. I believe that with all my heart.
That's good. Thank you. When I was in some of my darkest moments where I could not see the light at the end of the tunnel, and it wasn't for lack of being flat on my face before the Lord. I may had a makeshift altar on my bedroom floor, just crying out to him. But sometimes the only prayer that I could muster in those moments of extended moments, really, of laying flat on my floor were, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief.
Yes.
And he hears those cries of our heart. And and you had mentioned earlier on when we started about part of your journey to healing was being in the Word and renewing your mind with the
Yeah.
Word, and that is a path. Part of the path to healing, I know, but also once you are healed, we have to be able to continue to walk in that freedom. It's a renewing of the mind. We have to renew our mind with truth because the enemy wants to plague us constantly with lies. And and the spirit of death, I believe, that is across our land right now, in our homes, and spirit of suicide is at an epic high. I think probably never before in history. And so that is a very real spirit that we're fighting against. And again, we're not fighting against flesh and blood, but against principalities and just demonic forces that are coming against us. One thing, God's word is his will. And when you were talking about the pit, I just thought I've got to read from Psalm 40, where it's a promise to us. And so I have this thing where I will personalize God's word and I will make it mine because it is his love letter to us. But I just want to share this, and for anyone who needs this right now, it's Psalm chapter 40, where the psalmist says, I waited patiently for the Lord, and he inclined to me, and he heard my cry. And he brought me up out of the horrible pit, out of the miry clay, and set my feet upon a rock and established my steps. And he has put a new song in my mouth. And that's That is your life, Linda. He's put a new song in Linda's mouth. Praise to our God. Many will see it and fear and will trust in the Lord. Blessed is the man who makes the Lord his trust or her trust and does not respect the proud, nor such as turn aside to lies. Many, O Lord, O my God, are your wonderful works which you have done. And it goes on and on and on. And I would encourage everyone to just get in the word, look up Psalm 40 and personalize it. It would look like this. Shelley, you waited patiently for the Lord, and he inclined his ear to you, Shelley. Lord, you heard my cry. You brought me up out of the horrible pit, out of the miry clay. You've set my feet upon a rock and established my steps. And if you can't believe that, as you're reading that, say, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. And
Yeah.
he will come into the presence, into your presence, and into that moment of hopelessness. And he is your encouragement, and his word is our encouragement. So
Yeah. As a human being, we will feel anxiety at times. It can be as easy as some adrenaline dripping into our system for whatever reason, or we can become down. And I'm not mentally ill anymore, but I'm a human being. And to this day, I will suddenly realize, oh, like you've been kind of not feeling joy for a while, you feel kind of down. I will realize I need to renew my mind and I need to go back to the word and remind myself what the truth is, because I'll recognize you've been talking, we all have self-talk, and
right.
you've been talking to yourself that in ways that is not based on the truth of what God is doing in this world and in your life and behind the scenes. And so it's important to do that throughout your life, whether you're experiencing symptoms of mental illness or not.
Yeah.
It will inform your decisions. It will inform how you feel about your life, even your day.
Yeah.
And so that's very important.
Yeah. And sometimes we find it hard to be able to pinpoint what it is. We know something's
Yeah.
wrong and we can't pinpoint it. And there's a verse, it's Psalm 43:3 that I use personally often, and also as I'm praying with other women. It's Lord, send out your light and truth. Let them lead me to your holy hill and to your tabernacle. So send out your light and your truth. Sometimes we need to give him permission to shine his light and truth into our heart, into our mind,
Yeah.
and he'll begin to reveal that to us and show us, well, why we have this overwhelming sadness. There's a root to it, and
Yeah.
I'm not a therapist, I'm not at all, but I do know that there are roots, and the enemy wants to keep those roots in darkness. And as long as they're in darkness, and kept in that darkness until the light, they're shining light, they cannot come under the healing power of Jesus, and we are not going to experience freedom and healing from it.
Yep.
So. Well, Linda, thank you for sharing your story. You are truly a trophy of God's grace. I use that phrase, it seems a lot these days, because I'm hearing a lot of stories of women who have just overcome incredible pain and loss and trauma. But instead of raising your fist in anger and bitterness, you raised open hands and surrendered and yielded to him and allowed him to do that work. And the enemy wanted to destroy your life, and he didn't win.
No.
Had the victory. Praise God. So thank you for sharing.
Well, thank you.